Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the latest edition of Free Thought Hour, our weekly hour-long show featuring a guest. And we've got a very interesting guest today, but first of all, I'm going to introduce Tercia, my co-host, who's based in South Africa, so she's got winter. Ooh, how the devil are you?
How the devil are you, John? I'm fine. And I just have to say to our audience, you have confirmed that I am your favorite co-host of all your favorite co-hosts. I'm your favorite.
Well, this is true. Yes, you're the favorite of one.
I can live with that. And it is cold. I'm sitting at my husband's office table because the rest of the house has been packing in because, well, I'm packing the house because we're moving, but I've got the heater on and people might see Picasso climb up my shoulder, and that's my little kitten. So, yes, happy to see everybody here. I hope what do you always say? Our future, present, whenever on the internet is forever. So, hope to see people here in due course. And it's nice to have you here. And it's nice to see you, John, as always.
Oh, thank you. Yes. And I'm sorry that you've got to move because, as you know, I hate doing that. And I've stayed here for 50 years to prove how much I hate moving.
I actually quite enjoy moving every now and again. It gives me a chance to clear things out and pack things away and throw things away and reorganize. So I love change. It's weird. I won't say it's fun. I wouldn't sort of by choice do it regularly, but it's not so bad. It's just, you just do it.
It takes all sorts. We have to tolerate weird people in this world.
Oh, shame. Such a pity.
Can I bring on Matthew? Matthew Sabatine.
Please.
Hello, how the devil are you?
I am doing well, John. It's good to see you again. So I think it was in 2021, a couple years ago, when you and I met on the show for the first time. So
let me introduce you to Tercia, to Plessis.
Okay. Hi.
Hello, Matthew. I looked you up on Google, because pleased to meet you, and I can't wait to have a chat. I had a very short window of opportunity, and I just put Matthew Sabatine into the my search bar, and I think it was you who came up. There's also a dentist called Matthew Sabatine. You're not a dentist, are you?
No, I'm not a dentist. If you go on Google, apparently you'll find a lot of Matthew Sabatines, which is funny. A lot of them are, I think, doctors.
Okay. Well, obviously, Google has us sussed out because somehow the algorithm has us sorted out, because one of the first things that came up was the link to the video that you did with John a couple of years ago. So I recognized John, and then I knew it had to be the right Matthew that I had in my view. But I didn't do a lot of reading, so I'm basically meeting a blank slate.
Okay.
So maybe we can start, and you can ask me about me. So if you want to know where I am and what I'm doing, and then
okay.
If you want to. Otherwise, you can just begin by telling me about you.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to make sure I say your name right. So your name is Tercia.
You can say it like that. It's a very Afrikaans name. So I live in a small town about 100 kilometers northwest of Cape Town called Worcester.
Okay.
And my home language is Afrikaans. I'm a teacher by training, and I run a little small homeschool at the moment with a partner of mine. And my name is very Afrikaans. My surname is of French origin, and that's about me.
Okay. What do you teach?
Well, at the moment, I teach everything. I have kids from 12 to 15. And at the moment, I teach all the subjects. I even have 2 students doing the GED, the American what's GED? American qualification?
Yeah,
So
GED.
GED, I do social studies, I do maths, I do the whole shebang. But my field of speciality is English literature. And but I enjoy my maths, although I was terrible at it at school. But because I struggled, I love to help kids because I know what it feels like to struggle with maths. Did you struggle with maths?
Oh yeah, I struggled with math. Even to this day, I still struggle with it. But as time goes on, as I become more interested in biology and quantum mechanics, I'm becoming more courageous with math, and I think I'm getting the gumption to maybe teach myself. So,
Well, the great thing nowadays is that with YouTube, one can teach oneself almost anything.
right.
So, yeah, John.
The interesting thing about Matthew is when we met 2 years ago or more, whenever it was, we met on the basis that he had recently become an out and out atheist. And he's got this blog, which is the Common Caveat. And he was expressing his views about religion in a negative way. And I'd like to talk about that to him because he's changed. He's gone back to Christianity. And so I'd like to hear him tell us, first of all, what made him leave Christianity and become an atheist? And then what made him leave atheism and become a Christian again? Because that's an interesting journey.
Well, yes, Matthew, the first thing that came up when I searched you was that you're an ex-atheist. And I find that absolutely intriguing because I'm a former Christian. I grew up in the Reformed tradition.
Okay.
Strict Protestant evangelical Reformed in the Afrikaans version, very similar, I would say, to I don't think there's in the part in Michigan, in the parts of the USA that were settled by the Dutch. It's the Dutch Reformed Church. I know there are actually one or two of them in the United States. So that's the branch of religion that I grew up in, and I deconverted about 10 years ago. And I've often wondered about does one decide to become a Christian again? I'm so intrigued to hear about being an ex-atheist, especially. I can see somebody who never grew up religious converting, but I find it very difficult to imagine myself into the mind of somebody who was a Christian, then was a non-believer, and then went back to believing. How does one do that?
So I was raised with a Pentecostal charismatic background. I actually had a conversation with my mom last night. She kind of like tried to correct me on my understanding of my upbringing, because I have been saying that I grew up with a mixture of Pentecostal charismatic teachings and Baptist teachings. And she said to me last night, she said, I don't remember, did we have Baptist teachings? And I said, well, yeah, Mom, because I grew up listening to Paul Washer sermons with my dad and some other like-minded preachers. Maybe you've heard of Paul Washer before.
That's somebody I haven't heard of Paul Washer. But Matthew, I need to place you a little bit. Do you mind if I ask how old you are?
Yeah, I'm 33. I turned 33 in February of this year.
Okay, maybe not on the 20th, is it?
On the 12th.
Oh, my husband's on the 20th. Okay, so you're about the age of my youngest brother. It's interesting how one's age is a giveaway about what one experienced. But I don't know, Paul Washer. Can you spell it for me? Is it like Washer?
Yep, that's correct. And I think he might be a reformer, although I'm not entirely sure. He is one of those preachers who he preaches a lot about sin, repenting of your sin. He's very conservative. So just to give you some information on his flavor of teaching. So if you don't mind, I'll continue with my story.
Absolutely.
So,
sorry, I interrupted you. Continue.
That's okay. So I was a Christian until I was about 20. 2021, I became an agnostic. So at that point in my life, I was very unsure about the existence of God. So I just decided that I would stay on the fence by saying, I think that humanity cannot figure out if a God exists or does not exist. We have no way of knowing, according to the agnostic position. I was an agnostic until roughly 2014, when I had this extraordinary experience in one of my favorite local bookstores. I was just sitting at a table, and I was looking out the window. I had just broken up with a woman at that time, and I was kind of grieving a little bit, but I was not out of my mind. But all of a sudden, I just started having this extraordinary experience and feeling of peace and joy, unlike anything that I've ever experienced before. And it just came out of nowhere. It just happened randomly. And I felt like it was very spiritual. And I guess the reason why I felt like it was very spiritual is because I have been diagnosed with ADHD, and being raised with ADHD, I had a lot of anxieties. But on that day, I felt like I had no anxieties whatsoever. It just felt like everything was really, really fine. Everything was as it should be. Time slowed down, and I just became completely absorbed into my peaceful experience. And it was extraordinary enough that I started to question if God was talking to me. But I didn't want to give in to the notion right away. I wanted to be skeptical, but I also wanted to enjoy the experience. So it was from that day forward when I started dabbling in a number of different religions. So I dabbled in New Age spirituality. I dabbled in Buddhism and Hinduism. I visited many different temples, Hindu temples, in my surrounding area and beyond. I went to those temples. I prayed and meditated with their priests. I had worshipped their idols, participated in a lot of rituals, and eventually, by the end of 2015, I felt like Hinduism and Buddhism and other things of that New Age genre were not really serving me well. I didn't feel like I was getting or recreating that initial extraordinary, indescribable peace, that experience of peace that I got back in 2014 when I was at the bookstore.
Matthew,
so I was trying.
Sorry, I want to dig into that feeling. I want to ask you two things. The first one, if we could perhaps dig into that feeling a little bit more. But the second thing that we could perhaps talk to first is, you say that you worship the idols of those other religions. I'm curious, what exactly do you mean worshipped those idols? Because coming from a Christian tradition, obviously worship and to worship, to me, did you bow down? Did you pray? And how did that feel to you as somebody who grew up Christian? Do you actually make a connection to this statue in front of you? I'm curious to know how one experiences that. Because obviously, surely you know, and I think even people who believe in those religions know that it's an inanimate object that they are worshipping. How does that work? I've often wondered about that.
Okay, so that is a good question. Thanks for asking. So perhaps worship is not the best term. What I mean is that when I went into these temples, I had prostrated myself before the idols. I knelt down. I put my face to the ground. I physically engaged in all of the same motions and physicality of that the other what should I call them?
Believers?
Acolytes, maybe. What? I'm sorry.
Believers or fellow other people who acolytes, congregation members.
Right, congregation members. So I tried to follow in suit with them to try to make a connection with their idols. Amazingly, I never made a connection. I never felt. I just when I tried to go before their idols, I felt very thoughtless. I felt very dead inside. I felt just bored, really, really bored out of out of my mind.
Yeah. So that's
Um,
interesting, because you expected some sort of experience and it never happened.
Right, exactly. I definitely expected an experience. I really want to have the same type of experience that I got in the local bookstore in 2014. And I'm sorry.
No, thank you. That really clears it up for me. And what John said, that you expected an experience, and that can perhaps, I can imagine the boredom, because that's what I was trying. I can imagine myself going through something like that. I mean, you can go through the motions, but it's almost as if you have to engage a part of your brain, and you haven't been trained to use that mode of your brain in that context. But that is why I want to ask you about this experience that you had. And sorry if it's too personal, just stop me. You don't have to, obviously don't answer, but I'm really curious about how long did it last, and whether did it make you was it did you want to cry, did you want to and the reason I'm asking these questions is because the thing that interests me is when one has experiences like that, does one like that feeling of peace and contentment? Just before you came on, I was telling John, last year I went to visit my brother in the UK, and I spent some days with John and his family as well, and they live on the English coast, and I spent about 3 hours on the beach very close to their house. It was full moon, and the moon was rising over the English Channel, and I experienced something incredible in that time, but no part of me ascribed it to anything external except the surroundings that I was in, and that I was in a good place, and I loved every moment of it, and I still revisit that feeling. I took a time-lapse video, and what I'm wondering about is why does that feeling have to come from some entity outside of oneself? That's the question. And how does one know that it comes from an entity outside of oneself? And obviously there are circumstances that can trigger it, if trigger is the right word. For example, for me, it was where I was with who I was, the whole also the age that I'm at, and I just relished in the feeling, and to this day I've had similar experiences, but maybe it's because I'm too much of an atheist. I don't know. But I experienced. I would call that a deeply spiritual experience.
Do you know, I have a problem with this word spiritual.
So do I, John. That's why I don't actually want to use it, because it was a profound experience in a moment in time that I was privileged to have had. So that's why I want to. I'd like to dig into. Go ahead, John.
I noticed Matthew used the word spiritual, and I was going to ask him what he meant by that. But I think it transpires that he means a feeling. And my reaction is feelings are caused internally by hormones and, mental thoughts and stuff. And I can't see how anything can be imposed from the outside through the skull. I just can't see how. We're not connected to Bluetooth. I can't see how that will happen.
Yeah, I understand. So let me think for a minute how I can answer that. Tercia, you were talking about looking up at the moon, right? And you had your experience, and you had your peaceful experience. It was extraordinary to you. Do I got that correctly?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
And I know what you're talking about. I experienced that same thing when I walk outside at night and I look at the starry sky and I look at the moon, especially when the moon is big and bright and it turns orange and it looks so extraordinary. And the everything that's happening around me, the smell, the beautiful smell, it gives me that relaxed feeling. However, the experience that I had in 2014, I cannot compare that extraordinary experience to the awe and wonder that you feel when looking at nature, because I really had no words for it. I've tried to put it into words, but I feel like every time I do, I never really fully capture the experience. And I actually, I give my full story on my YouTube channel if you'd be interested in watching it.
Yes, I definitely will.
Yeah, I discuss on there my personal story in 3 parts. It adds up to 90 minutes. So I definitely think that, like what John said, everything you're thinking and feeling, it's all caused by mental stuff and hormones. You have hormones and neurotransmitters and neurons firing with the synapses that bridge the neurons together. And you have all of these networks, these cellular networks happening within your nervous system to give rise to these experiences. And I think that in today's culture, we have this image that nothing ever enters into the brain from the outside, but actually we constantly have nature coming in. We have light coming in. There's constant information and energy moving from the environment into our eyes and into our ears. That whole process is called transduction, where you get external stimuli getting converted into signals within. So I see nature, I see our connection with nature as it's kind of seamless in a lot of ways, but it's also broken up by this perception of us as humans being separate from nature. So I think that there is a reciprocal relationship between the environment influencing you, your hormones influencing you, your thoughts influencing you, and everything else in between that is cellular, molecular, and atomic. And then, of course, you have quantum mechanics too. And as we progress with our science, we're learning more and more about how all of this works. And I think that with my extraordinary experience that I had, it had to involve some dopamine, some oxytocin, and some serotonin. A lot of these good feeling chemicals, right? They had to be involved, but maybe to some extent or another, they were kicked into overdrive on that day. In spite of all of that, I think that doesn't really dismiss away that God was involved, because I think that God can use nature to communicate with us. What really fascinates me about my experience is that I had only been able to experience something extraordinary like that 4 more times in my entire life thus far. I've tried to recreate it and I can't. And each time that those things have happened, they really happened without me planning it.
My next question was going to be, how many times have you, or if you've experienced it since? So it seems to be something that doesn't happen on a regular basis and that you can't control. Am I right?
Yeah, it doesn't happen on a regular basis. Not really. I mean, I do have these times where I do feel really peaceful, especially during prayer. Prayer and meditation really does help to change my state of mind. And it really helps me to regulate my anxiety and depression. But I have never been able to pray or meditate my way into a blissful experience like I had on those 4 separate occasions.
So when you experience that spiritual feeling in the bookshop,
Yeah.
that converted you from Christianity to atheism, you thought that God was involved at that time?
So when I first had the experience in the bookstore, that was in 2014. I had the idea that God was involved. The idea was very prominent in my mind, and part of me wanted to give in, but the other part of me wanted to remain skeptical and sit on it for a while, and I did. Um, so I guess that's why I started trying to dabble in as many different religions as I could find to try to find the common denominator. And so eventually, when I left New Age spirituality, I started going back to church because for whatever reason, for whatever reasons that I feel like I really can't put into words, I just felt drawn back to church. I felt like church, there was something about church and Christianity that I had to make peace with. I, I didn't know how I was going to do that, but I just kind of just went along with it. And when I started going back to church, I started meeting people who were pretty good to me. And I remember walking into a church randomly one night, and there was a pastor there, roughly my age. He welcomed me, and he's like, "Hey, what you up to?" And I was like, "I don't know, man. I'm looking for God." And he says to me, "Well, this is the place to find God." And I said, "Okay, well, I'm going to scope it out and see if God's really here." And so for about a month or two, I was trying to go to church, but not really fully believing. And then there came a day when a pastor had from a different church, he had approached me and started talking to me about repentance and sin. And it was a conversation that I wasn't really ready to have, but I was having it anyway. And it was in that time that I just felt like I was ready to make peace with Yahweh, who I had been trying to run from for so many years. And when I prayed the prayer of repentance with the pastor, I felt this extreme relief. Like I just felt like a weight was lifted off of my shoulders, and I felt like I had been making peace with somebody who I had just been hating for so long, and I just felt relieved.
Okay, well, it's honorable that you surveyed all the options and went to Hinduism and spiritualism and tried to make an informed decision by selecting your top of the menu, if you like.
Yeah.
But what was the basis for making the choice? It seems to me it's the one you like, you feel that you like best, rather than the one that is most evidential. Is that a fair assessment?
Maybe. I don't know if it's really correct to say that I chose it based on the one that I liked, because I really liked Hinduism. I really, 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 really liked Buddhism, but for some reason I just couldn't connect with it. Not as much as I can with Christianity, because I just get this connection with a God who deals with sin, a God who wants me to improve myself away from sin and to put down my selfish desires and to make myself available to do what pleases him. So I want to connect with something outside of myself. I want to go beyond my own ego and connect with a plan that's greater than mine. And the God of Christianity seems to fit that.
Okay, can I come in here? Because John, I think I have a slightly different take from the one that you have as a former believer.
Yeah.
This is to me, this is such an interesting conversation, because I perhaps find it easier to identify with the feelings that you describe, and your feelings of connection as somebody who was a former believer. I was just telling this morning or yesterday, I was telling somebody that I was the caliber believer who, although I didn't grow up in a Pentecostal type of religion, I was open to spiritual experiences. And I was actually once in a church where the pastor said that I had the gift of healing, and I believed that I could heal people. I honestly believed that for a period of time. Although now, if I look back, I wonder if I really believed it. It's funny how one's mind works. But when I listen to you,
can I just?
Yes,
can I
John,
just
go
ask,
ahead.
what is belief? I mean, both of you seem to assign an enormous amount of value to this action of believing.
That,
And
John,
I'm thinking, I believe my chosen horse will win the 3:30. Well, it's just trivial.
but John,
Mm-hmm.
that's what I want to get to, because as somebody who believed there was a moment in time where I was convinced that there was a possibility that I had the power of healing. And then what I went on and did, and I don't know if that's just the way my brain is wired. So this pastor told me that I had the gift of healing, and I laid my hands on the hand of the wrist of a woman who had arthritis, and she claimed that her pain subsided, and I was happy that she had less pain. And my response was, the next time one of my kids, they were still small and they developed a fever, and I said to myself, well, if I have the gift of healing and I believe it, surely belief can be tested. And I lay my hands on my child's forehead and I prayed and I said, now the temperature should go away. And 3 hours later, it hadn't gone away. And I tried again. And then I said, all right, now I'm going to give the Calpol. And the Calpol worked. And I came to the conclusion, and I acknowledged to myself, well, maybe there is something such as that you can heal people through faith, but obviously I don't have it, or it doesn't work, or both. And that's why the idea of believing something is one thing, but then appropriating your follow-up action on that belief confirms whether the belief is true or false. Now, if you have an experience that is an internal experience that can be caused by anything from an electrical circuit in your brain that misfires, you get things like all types of imperceptible epileptic seizures that don't present as a fit, that just presents as you don't even know you're having them, and it's not bad for you. I find it problematic that one then ascribes that experience, that subjective experience that one has, to some outside force. I just want to make it very clear that I'm in no way saying that one didn't have the experience or that one knows what the experience. It's possible for a complex biological creature such as we are to have a variety of subjective experiences that cannot be explained.
Exactly.
But
and the fact that they can't be explained doesn't mean that God done it. You have to provide a connection. And what you're talking about there is a non sequitur. There is no connection. You laid your hands on this arthritic woman's wrist and she felt better. That she might have felt better anyway. This is not a controlled random trial.
She might just have felt better because it was a situation where there was adrenaline and my hand was warm and it was she was expecting to feel better. But Matthew, what I want to
placebo effect. So you feel better.
The thing that I want to get into is this whole idea of sin, and that you feel very strongly that you felt that you had to confess some sort of sin. Now, the branch of religion that I grew up in has a very strong emphasis as well on that we come into this world covered in sin. We are made and born in sin, and you have to feel guilty about all the sin that you are doing. I kept a diary from the age of 15 until about 15 years ago. And the one main thing that religion taught me was that you have to constantly feel guilty. And the branch of religion that I grew up in has the belief that if you are not feeling guilty, then you're not loving God the way you should, because you as a human being, you cannot be good. You have to constantly fight your own ego. You are speaking words that are so familiar to me.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on what one's personality profile is, I remember feeling guilty when I did something good, because if you do something good, you have to know that I'm not capable of doing anything good. Only God can do good through me. And if I feel good because I'm doing something good, then I'm actually sinning, because I'm not allowed to feel good because I'm doing something good, because I can't do something good,
You're out of character. That's the trouble. Yeah. Well, I have a big problem with the word sin.
So
Nobody's been able to give me a satisfactory definition of it. They can give me examples, and they can give me analogies, and they can give me other words, synonyms for sin, but they can't actually define it.
Well, how would you define sin, Matthew? I'd like to know. I'd like to dig into sin with you a little bit. Do you mind if we sin a little bit?
So I'll try to give you the concisest, simplest definition. Sin simply means to miss the mark, to fall short of perfection. And in the New Testament context, the Greek word for sin was hamartia, and that involved an archer shooting his arrow with his bow, shooting his arrow at the target and missing.
Okay, hang on. We need to unpack this. Because firstly, what is perfection?
Yes.
That's the first concept. And then secondly, if sin means that you missed the target, who put the target there?
Yes.
And what is the target? And to me, that's vitally important.
Yes.
Because if there's a God who says that sin means to miss the target, then bloody hell, where's the target?
Yes.
Because
Is it like missing the bus?
But it's worse than that, because the book that is supposed to be the target can be so open to interpretation that your target and my target and the Westboro Baptist Church target are completely different targets.
Mm.
And I have not yet come across a believer of any stripe who could clear up for me what is the target and how do I know that I'm aiming for the right target. And that's my problem with sin. And that's why, Matthew, I'm so sorry, but your definition of sin means to miss the target opens up more problems than solutions.
Mm-hmm. I understand.
Do you understand that?
It implies that you can't come second. I mean, being second would be a sin because you've missed being first. You've not achieved perfection. That's horrible.
So perfection would have to mean not being flawed in any way, having no wickedness in any way, and perhaps that could look like living a lifestyle, having a moral character that absolutely nobody can disagree with or object to. And I would have to say that's impossible to...
I disagree with you.
Okay.
I absolutely disagree with you. Because firstly, morality is something that we as people define.
Mm-hmm.
And it varies from context to context. It's adjustable. From culture to culture. So firstly, that is something that we can't even define what would be a perfectly moral life. And I'm telling you, I know people whom I would in all the years that I've known them, they have not done anything that is immoral according to the measures of the society that I live in.
Mhm.
And something that I often wonder about, and I don't hear, I'm still coughing a little bit every now and again. Something that I often wonder about, and I've never heard apologists talk about this, and I listen to a lot of debates and conversations, and I've never heard the when people talk about sin and moral perfection, I've never heard people talk about mentally impaired individuals. Now, just down the street from where I live is a home for children with severe disabilities. And I often walk past there and I see them and I see their caretakers, and I'm thinking to myself, this child who's now 12 or 13 has been born, they cannot speak, they cannot do anything for themselves. They're completely dependent for their very survival on the help of other people. Are you telling me that even a person such as that is not perfect morally? Because that individual, they know enough to know that, I mean, they're conscious and they know when they take something from someone. So what do you do? How do you speak to something like that when you talk about living a morally blameless life?
Mm-hmm. I want to answer a question that you had asked earlier. You said that morality differs from context to context. I would say that a lot of the fine details in ethics vary from context to context. However, there are at least 5 different moral foundations that are typically accepted in most societies. Number one, loyalty. I think number 2 is to not murder. Number 3 would be to not steal. I'm drawing that from a particular social psychologist. He goes by the name of Jonathan Haidt. He has studied human morality and cultures from the standpoint of evolutionary psychology, and he has discovered that for the most part, those things are universally accepted. That you should also take care of your kin, that you should not lie, that you should not gossip, nor be malicious, and that when you are amongst the community, you, on some level or another, you give yourself over to the community, and you practice selflessness. And so I understand that to practice selflessness, to give the appearance of selflessness, that varies from context to context, depending on what the other person needs or wants. So if I give a promise, I must keep my promise. Otherwise, if I break it, then I have broken trust and loyalty with another person. I think things like that, in a broader way. So this is a broad rubric of how to behave in life. Those things are very universally accepted, and typically, I'm sorry.
Me, I want to come in.
Go in, John. And then me.
Okay, because what you have just described there, Matthew, is the biological imperatives of social animals. The way we succeed is by cooperating, and that means that we need to be loyal to our cooperators, and it means that it's counterproductive to kill them or even to harm them in any way, because, of course, if you harm somebody, they're likely to withdraw their cooperation if you haven't accidentally killed them, and so are their friends and family who watched you do the harming. They're likely to withdraw their cooperation. And we need cooperators. We need people to look after us, to grow the crops, to make the shoes. You know, we are social animals. And so what you've just described there is from an anthropological viewpoint, or from what you called evolutionary psychology, and I think that's the only sort of psychology there should be, what you've described there doesn't need a God.
Sorry, Matthew. It's,
do you mind if I just say something real quick? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So to go back to something that you had asked earlier, what is perfection? What is sin? So when in the context of social cooperation, when we fail to uphold our promises and to do what is necessary to keep the social cooperation, we have chaos, and we miss the mark. And we often see ourselves missing the mark when we get into violent disputes and we hurt each other and cause pain and suffering, when we impose upon each other's when we oppose upon each other without consent, those kinds of things really cause chaos and violate the social cooperation that we need.
Well, you're right, because what I presented the positive side of being a social animal, but you're right as well, because being social animals means that we have to have we can't all be the sheep. We need a leader, and therefore we need a hierarchy. And and at that point, the imperative becomes to look after our group, our tribe, the members of our religion, and that's where the division starts.
Because
so there is a tension going on here. There's a tension between social community and hierarchical leadership.
So I find in Christianity that Scripture compels me to try to make peace with all people, insofar as it depends on me. I have to do my duty of cooperating with others to try to meet their needs, insofar as it depends on me, insofar as what I can do within my own control and power. So, and part of that is loving my neighbor. Part of that is to not threaten anybody with violence, or don't spread lies, don't do anything that I know for sure would hurt somebody else and cause them pain. It is morally imperative for me to avoid those things, and to be able to navigate all of those different levels and dimensions really requires a lot of social intelligence. And you had mentioned that such a social cooperation from an evolutionary standpoint does not need to involve a God. And I'm hoping, and if you don't mind, because I know we're running out of time, and there's just so much to talk about and so much to say, and I've had such a pleasure talking with you guys. I was hoping if maybe we could get into the thing that I wanted to talk about today, which was some neuroscience and mind, brain, and consciousness in relation to the soul. Would it be okay for me to get into that?
The soul? Well, first you have to prove that there is such a thing.
Matthew, I want to make a suggestion. Want to make a suggestion. So Thank you so much. I'm enjoying this so much. I haven't even looked at the time. So thank you so much, and thank you for being a fantastically honest interlocutor. I've enjoyed this so much. I would love to continue this with you at some stage, maybe not on John's platform. Maybe you and I can have a discussion on your or my platform. But John,
no loyalty there then.
Well, John, if it depends on you. If you want loyalty, get a dog.
Yeah, there you go. That's good.
Very sound.
But John, if you don't mind, if I just want to ask you, Matthew, with your permission, we have 10 minutes to go.
Sure.
Could we park the soul business for a next conversation? Because I would like to just go back to the very interesting concept of sin that I don't think we've unpacked enough.
Okay.
I don't think the world's going to end. I think we'll have another opportunity for discussion because this is so much fun. So I would, if you don't mind, and if it's all right with you, John, can we park the soul discussion because I would really like to sort of get a sense of closure, if it's possible, in the last few minutes about sin and morality, because I agree with you about those universal, let's call them moral ideas, but I absolutely see that that's because we're a social species. And the thing is, if we say that those things, not to kill, not to steal, those not to gossip, that those things are based on a God, then God must also be the God of chimpanzees and bonobos, and also they must have souls, and they must also be able to sin on it. Because if you look at the experiments of people like Frans de Waal, I don't know if you're familiar with Frans de Waal. He's a primatologist.
I actually just read from him maybe an hour before I got on this show. That's just what a strange coincidence. Yes, I read about his primatology experiment. I read about his primatology experiment with chimps. So chimps do have moral behavior. They express empathy, benevolence, and altruism with each other when they decide to share their food rewards with each other, and because they prefer to do that instead of keeping it to themselves all the time.
And they have a very keen sense of fairness,
Yes.
because all of our moral behavior, if you grind it down, it's based in a sense of fairness and reciprocity, because and those members of the species who have, like you called it, social intelligence, and that's what I would say, that those members of the species who have a higher degree of social intelligence have a better ability to read reciprocity and appropriate reciprocal behavior. And the larger and the more complex the societies are, the more complex navigating those networks become. And that's why chimpanzee troops, for example, they become dysfunctional when they exceed about 200 members. And it also has to do, we are also limited by the resources available. And that's why I think our modern societies are so complex to navigate, because the struggle for resources, we don't really have to struggle for resources. So it manifests in different ways. So I think we're on broadly the same space as far as morality is concerned, although you might still attribute it to some sort of God. But I want to really dig into this idea of sin, because I want to hold your feet to the proverbial fire, Matthew, and let's work with your definition of sin as missing the mark or failing to be perfect. Then I still think that the very key question we need to get to is, where is the bullseye? How do we agree about the bullseye? And if there's a God who wants us to meet the bullseye, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with accepting that but then that God has to make it very clear, this is the bullseye, and this is what you must do to aim for that bullseye. There should be no room for interpretation of where the bullseye is, what it looks like, how big it is. Because to me, that's the problem with sin. The bullseye is not clear.
And there's a problem with consistency too, because whatever action, whatever behavior you alight upon, it's not always bad, is it? I mean, there's murder at one extreme and there's mercy killing at the other.
So I would say part of hitting the bullseye is to not murder any innocents, to not steal, to not lie, to not.
Never, ever. So if I'm hiding Jews in my basement and the Nazis knock at the door, then I have to be honest, because now when I speak the truth, I have to kill an innocent. But what if the Jew that I'm hiding is a mass murderer, or what if the Jew that I'm hiding in my basement abused his wife?
I
What
think
do you
I
do?
think that I think that that kind of lying is inevitable. But so when I say about lying, I'm talking about lying for for the benefit of selfish gain, to gain something for yourself primarily at the expense of somebody else. So that kind of lying would not include lying to a Nazi to continue hiding a Jew.
I get you. I get
Right.
you.
And who decides? I mean,
Because actually, real quick, I just want to mention, if I remember correctly, I think that in Exodus chapter 2, when Pharaoh's people were trying to go after the baby Jews, the women who were hiding those babies lied to the authorities to keep those babies alive, to keep them in hiding. And this
well,
was perfectly good and normal. So I think that from a biblical standpoint versus a modern day standpoint, in our modern day standpoint, we're not very explicit with what we often mean by lying. we
so
we tend to think.
you're telling us that morals are actually a grey area and that they've changed over the centuries. Come on, I mean,
So in some ways, in a lot of ways, ethics change a lot. Like in relationships, ethics change, but the overall archetype does not change. It really has never been morally acceptable to kill people, to murder innocents, or to lie primarily for your own selfish benefit to the expense of someone else who is innocent. So
if I'm a doctor and I see a patient who I diagnose as having a very short life expectation, would it be all right for me to lie to them and not tell them that they're going to die in a few days? Would that be all right? That lie?
probably not, because why are you lying to them? What benefit are you giving to them by lying? That's the most important thing.
Hope.
I'm saving them suffering. I'm preventing that. I know that they're going to have a very quick, painless death in 3 hours, but they can still enjoy the last 3 hours in absolute fun because they don't know they're going to die. But if I tell them they're going to die, then they're not going to enjoy the last 3 hours, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Can I finish?
The question is, who makes the call?
You're asking a very good question, and I appreciate that. That kind of lying is very distinguishable. I mean, if you have to lie to a patient for the sake of, easing their death experience, I mean, I really don't object to that. What I object to is the kind of lying where, if you lie to the patient for your own benefit primarily over theirs, that wouldn't be acceptable.
I absolutely agree. John, we're running on to time. I just want to say, as the only woman on the panel, Matthew, are you married or do you have a partner?
I do not.
The ultimate moral question that you have to be confronted with is, do I look good in these jeans?
Wow, okay, so Tercia, I've got to say, Tercia, that is one of the biggest conundrums ever, and I don't know what to do about that one.
Matthew, I can help you here. I can advise you on what not to say. It isn't. Can you step back a bit so I can get it all in?
But John, we've got 20 seconds. I just want to have. I don't care what happens in the next 20 seconds. I just want to say, Matthew, I haven't had this much fun the whole week, and it was absolutely fantastic. And I'd like to connect with you again sometime, hopefully sooner rather than later. Because
I was going to say,
I think
we don't actually have. Although we're fishing, I've got several lines up. We don't actually have anybody for the next week, and
Well, we do.
Probably
We do.
not
We
the
we
week
have
after
somebody
that.
for next week. I've got somebody.
Oh, okay. Well, we can,
Haven't told you yet.
in the very near future, we can invite you back, Matthew, because there's lots to talk about in your conscious and neuroscience subject area too.
Okay, I definitely agree to all of that. However, you want me to come back on the show, whether you want me to appear on your show, Tercia, or come back here, John, I can do whatever works best for you guys. And it was a huge pleasure. It was a huge pleasure. I can't pronounce my words. It was a huge pleasure to talk to both of you today, and I really look forward to meeting with you again.
Great.
Please, Matthew,
Thank you very much
stay
for coming.
online. Stay online after we close the live. I just want to get some details from you, please.
Okay, sure.
Say bye-bye, and thank you, viewers. Thank you, viewers, for watching.
All
Bye,
right.
viewers.